Welcome to the Fearless Security Management, Control, Influence, and Feedback webinar. This webinar, we're going to start out as we do, talking about how we might understand protection management in terms of fear, uncertainty, and doubt versus the facts. Talk about how we do this in particular at Fearless, and then talk about how you can do this fearlessly. So fear, uncertainty, and doubt in the management space typically relates to fear of offending or being fired. Notionally, people think that if they offend higher ups, they'll be fired. If they offend others, they may help to get us fired. They might be unhappy when we tell them the truth as we see it. So very often the decision is just not to tell them. And this is, of course, an enormous problem in the information protection space, because in some sense, knowledge is power. My view is, Fearless Security's view is that the facts bring clarity, that you really can't do your job if you're afraid of losing it. Now, I know a CISO at a major company who's been a CISO at several previous major companies who has the philosophy that the day they get their new job is when they start looking for the next one. And I think that's a fascinating perspective, but I think it's realistic for somebody in that position, because the average time in office for a CISO or somebody at a similar level is about 2 to 3 years. And they either move up or out. They tend not to move back down to some other position. And also, it's not usually, what you say. There are ways of communicating effectively. It's really how it's communicated. And this sort of brings up the question of who makes a good CISO and what the job is really about. And I'll tell you, my general view is that a good CISO should have a combination of management and technical experience. And a lot of the challenge that we see is people that have a lot of one and almost none of the other. And so when you have a lot of management experience, you're potentially good at managing people and budget and communication and so forth. But if you don't understand the technology, then the people that work for you and the people that are trying to sell things to you will help you to make mistakes. At the same time, the people that are really technically good are, very, very strong technically. They maybe understand everything there is to understand within the realm of the corporation that's relevant, but they're just, not usually very good at communicating and doing the things that managers have to do to be successful. So, sort of the big question then is, what is that job really all about? And I'll tell you, I run a business and I manage protection not only, for our business, but for others. And we do support for protection management. And it's really, when we talk about it, it's about management. It's not so much about the security. Certainly there is security involved, but it's a management exercise. It has to do with a feedback loop, and we'll show you that feedback loop in another slide or two, and it's on our standard diagram. So, I managed a company with 250 employees back in the 1980s, and I couldn't stand it. So I would not be a very good CISO. I certainly wouldn't want to manage 250 employees again. 5 or 10, maybe that's okay. I've handled, 30, 35 since then, but I don't like managing large numbers of people. And that probably makes me not the best employee in that management position. What we do is we manage protection for others, but we don't do it all. We manage internal protection for ourselves, and we don't do that all either. So the question is, what do you do to effectively manage as opposed to the other things that have to get done, but you probably don't do as a manager? And my view on this is that management is about power and influence. And the power and influence are used to cause process to work properly for the organization that you're working for. So to understand power and influence, you might want to watch this YouTube video here. And I'll just show you how to get to it. If you're on the all.net website, you click down here. It's a talk I gave at Sandia National Laboratories. It's getting old. It's about 14 plus years old. But it still has the same information. And supporting that, I've included in the presentation my power and influence slides, which are, not only an eye chart, but way too complicated to talk about in a webinar. You would need hours to go through it, or at least significantly more time than we have right now. But I'm just bringing them up. This is the Keras persuasion model, which is the basis of a great deal of the work that's been done on negotiations. And then this has to do with human cognitive errors and what mistakes people commonly make, and thinking through how to prevent these mistakes, or how to use them to bring forth the organizational goals is worthwhile. But you should really listen to that video. How Fearless does it, we follow a standard of practice that we have, and we'll talk about that in a minute. The list of issues: management policy, standards, procedures, documentation, auditing, testing, technology, personnel, incidents, legal, physical knowledge, training, awareness, and organization. We review processes at a rate that's dictated by risk management levels, so we review things more often when they have higher consequences. We use separation of duties internally. We specify and verify for others, but we don't operate for others. For ourselves, we specify and operate, and we do some of the verification, but we have external verification as well. We follow common standards and simple policies where as simple as we can make them. The examples are ISO 27001 and 2, and the generally accepted system security principles. We document with the tools that you've seen in some of our previous presentations, and we'll show you some of JDM today as we walk through the details. We don't have external audits, but our customers do have external audits. We do periodic testing, awareness, education, and so forth. We try to minimize personnel issues by hiring people that are, cleared, long trusted, people we know for a long period of time, and limiting their access. We have a physical security, in place. Legal is integrated into the information protection program, and strangely, we don't seem to get any incidents. Every once in a while, every few years, we'll get something, that happens to us that's, worth attention. But so far, no incidents that have had any consequence that's substantial for us or our customers. So I guess maybe we're just lucky, but there's another possibility. So, if you want to do this, how do you do it fearlessly? And so I'm going to start by talking about our standard of practice. Now, our standard of practice is, it's not a standard. Right? It's not like ISO 27001. It's not approved by a standards body. It's not something where you go follow it, where you check off the boxes. It's also not really a practice. It's a baseline of practice. That is something you do, or something we do. It's open source, and I'll take you there. You go to all.net, you click on protection, and this is the diagram that depicts our approach to information protection. Security management is here. That's what we're talking about today. And the standards of practice for industrial control systems for enterprises and our current draft for archives are here. And I'll just click on the archives version, and you'll see it has a variety of different issues in different categories. We're talking about management today, so we're going to go through these issues. And on each one of those, when you drill down into it, for example, CISO, you'll have a set of options and the basis for decision making. And for the ones that are released in that form, you'll also have the particulars of the decision. So I'm going to walk through some of that today, so you'll understand specifically our thoughts in that area. We use the standards of practice and it's available for anybody. So please use it. Tell us what you think of it. We use this standard of practice to help our experts. It helps us to ask a reasonably comprehensive set of questions, to codify responses consistently using a defined language. It helps to guide decisions using these predefined bases, but it doesn't force decisions. What happens is our people, when we work with our customers and when we work internally, we identify variances from the baselines for consideration. And when there's a variance, we keep track of it. If it's a one-off for some particular case, for some particular organization, that's fine. If it's something we see repeated or something we think might be more generalized, we update the standard of practice. Like I said, when it works, we use it. When it doesn't, we adapt and update it if and as appropriate. The control system is what security management is about. Security management the manager doesn't do everything. What they have to do is they have to act, for example, to influence policy, influence standards, and so forth. At the same time, they can't sort of influence auditing, but they also have to observe. So they observe, for example, how procedures are working, what the outcomes are, and they observe the documentation that's produced, and they observe the audit results. And they use their power and influence as a control system to look at what they observe and act to change things that need changing. So that's the way we codify what security management, protection management is. So you act, you observe, that gives you the feedback, and then you adapt. And that's an observe, act loop. And I also want to note here that there's separation of duties issues. So, the challenge is, and many of us seen this in large enterprises, for example, they'll have somebody who's in charge of information protection, and they are also the person that's supposed to implement the protection and verify that they've implemented it. Well, the problem is this isn't good for the organization. You need a separation of duties, or else the person specifying it also makes it work and then verifies that it worked. And if it doesn't work at all, they won't even know. So generally, we advise specify and verify for a CISO and management by line management. And there's another issue in this feedback loop. Note all these observations and these actions. Well, they don't really operate continuously. What happens is you have a rate at which you look at these things. So the rate is sort of dictated by process element, but also by consequence. Generally, if there's a higher consequence, then management wants to observe and act at a higher rate. And that's what's codified there. Well, so now I want to just take you into the tool we use, JDM, Judgment Decision Making is its name, and walk you through some of the elements of the standard of practice with regard to protection management. The first one is what process you use overall, and this is the one we advise. The way this tool works, I'm just going to do some cut and paste here, hopefully, is you can copy things from the decision window, for example, into the as is or the future state, or the basis window. So there are various windows codifying different elements of what you're doing. I'm just going to go to the next decision. So, management, the CISO or whatever the name is that you have for the enterprise security lead, is there one and where are they placed, right? So this is a particular example that we're doing with one of our customers. It's a university, and we have permission to show these sorts of results. But the issue here is that, for small enterprises with a few hundred workers, there, typically isn't a CISO. There's somebody, that works in information technology, or many people that work in information technology that take on the role. And so there are various advice. So a director position might be good within ITO within the IT organization for a small privately owned company. On the other hand, you might look at the CISO within the chief counsel's office or the chief security officer's office if it's not a top level position, or as a side box to the CEO or COO. We do generally advise against the CISO working for the CIO, the chief information officer. And the reason is that this creates the separation of duties problem that we've discussed, and it typically exacerbates it. The CIO is the person who is sort of most likely to be making decisions in the information technology arena, and the CISO's job, for the most part, is to assure that those decisions are made properly. And you can't do that if you work for somebody. Well, you can try. But on the other hand, you do get dealt the hand that you get. What are the duties of the protection lead? This goes to the separation of duties issues that I discussed. And there are various approaches for various circumstances. And we provide the means to codify this in the standard of practice. Security metrics. I talked about measurements and measurement rates. This is our table of measurement rates. Basically, as a function of consequence, different things that you do should be done at different rate. For example, S is at the shift level. So for Personnel issues, regardless of consequence, you should be at the end of a shift. If there's a personnel issue that comes up, you should be addressing it no later than the end of the shift. There probably are yearly reviews as well, and so forth. So as a function of consequence, you have daily awareness for high consequence. Not that it's a big awareness program. You just need to make sure every day that they're aware of the issues. For medium consequence, it's monthly, and for low consequence, yearly. So this is our view. Obviously, for your organization, this may or may not work, but it provides some guidance that we use in advising clients. What policies are needed, and which ones do you use? And these are sort of the broad general policy areas. And essentially, this is a function, as you can see, of maturity, regulatory mandates, size, right? So different situations call for different decisions. Which widely used control standards should you use? Same sort of thing. It's a matter of what you're trying to achieve. Different standards are designed for different objectives. What power and influence does the security lead have? So when you think through this, the right to control things, the right to inspect them, the capacity to analyze them, and position and so forth are the things that lead to the power and influence. So again, we have our standard approach that says there are different things in different situations. It has to do with the duties to specify, examine, and manage. And in order to specify, you need to be able to tell people what to do. And in order to examine, you need the right to inspect, and so forth. Documentation. We have our documentation approach. This tool is actually the documentation of security architecture that we use for ourselves and for our clients. This is the top level documentation. Then as we develop over time, we continue to edit this for the more specifics and details. And as it changes over time, we can document the changes over time. So we have a track of where we're going and how far we are along the path of getting there. And we also have other documentation that's more detailed for procedures and so forth. And so should you. How are audits managed? Same sort of thing. There are different audit requirements for different risk levels in this case. You can think of it as consequence combined with threat. The protection testing function, this is something that many people don't have a good grip on. They'll do scanning or some such thing, which is a fine thing to do. The problem with scanning is it tends to identify lots of things, but it doesn't sort them in terms of importance or relevance or which ones to address first. And a lot of organizations, when they find such a thing, they determine that they have to fix everything they find for liability reasons. And now there are products that help do this better. They identify the difference between more and less critical vulnerabilities, what kind of access you can gain, and so forth. But the protection testing function is really intended to allow you to determine whether and to what extent the protection that you have identified as appropriate is in fact in place. That's really what testing is about. It's not looking for vulnerabilities, it's verifying that your protection does what you think it's supposed to do. And that's a function that many don't do very well, but it's something that's an important goal. Personnel issues, how do you deal with different personnel issues? Most organizations have this, large organizations certainly have this well in hand. Background checks, which background checks apply for what circumstances? How do you handle incidents? Again, it's not the actual handling of the incidents, it's the structure you have in place as a management team to determine how incidents will be managed. Legal issues, you need a process to bring changes to civil law, criminal law, laws across the world, depending on where you operate, into balance with your protection program so that you're meeting all of the requirements and at the same time, making the right determinations and informing the relevant people of what their responsibilities are. Physical security, how well do you integrate it and what do you do in the physical space for the information related assets? Knowledge is about how much your workers know and how that knowledge helps them perform their jobs and how you track that. Security awareness, we're all aware of security awareness programs. Actually, this talk's probably not a bad awareness program. And then from there, we go into control architecture. So that's the end of this area of the standard of practice. So, what about the technology issues? It's another good question, but it's a good question for next month. We're going to be talking about control architecture next month. The hidden thing that most security people don't even know exists and are not really taught about. So with that, I'm going to turn off the recording and open the floor for questions.